Playing the trumpet is on the one hand a very complex matter. On the other is very simple, expressing yourself, playing. All musicians operate in this field of complexity and simplicity. I am looking forward to meeting Wolfgang Guggenberger today. Wolfgang is a professor at the Trossingen University of Music. Hello.
Hello.
Some say that one needs exact knowledge about anatomy, tongue position, and so on, and one should pay attention to very specific details when practicing. And others assume that the body can implement the musical ideas by itself. What is your opinion about that?
Like always, both sides are right. On the one hand, we are instinctively able to carry out many actions. Many things that we need in order to play the trumpet are already there. For example, breathing is a natural, innate process that we do not have to learn all over again. We only have to let it happen naturally. It's a balancing act. We should try to learn things consciously, but also let our learning process occur naturally.
I am an Alexander teacher, and you have been using this technique for many years. What is it all about? Why are you using this technique?
Ich bin kein Alexandertechniklehrer. Ich mache das seit über 30 Jahren.
Well, I'm not an actual Alexandertechnique teacher. I've just been using the technique for more than 30 years. It has taught me to observe many phenomena, and I've learned a great deal about myself through it. Alexandertechnique is very interesting for us musicians and also very popular because musicians always tend to exaggerate physical tensions. This is certainly because we try to play with a lot of expression. We need emotions. We need that incredible intensity in us to create musical expression. This emotional intensity often reflects itself in the body in a harmful way. Alexandertechnique helps us reveal these negative patterns, which are often very unconscious. It helps us recognize and release tensions and blockages. It helps us develop a relaxed attentiveness, which is so important for intensive listening, and that is of great importance to us. It teaches us to wait, which is a very important point, to be able to wait or pause. Alexander calls this inhibition. This pause, even if it is only for a tiny moment, allows us to be present and to perform an activity with much more clarity and with much more calm. Alexandertechnique provides us with tools which are also helpful when playing the trumpet.
The way you have described it is much more comprehensive than the relaxation methods that are also used by many musicians. True to the saying, I have noticed that after playing my shoulders are cramped, and then I use a relaxation method so it doesn't get worse and that I do not have problems later. But as you described it, the approach seems to be a completely different one.
Ich weiß nicht, ob es so komplett anders ist, aber der Zugang ist natürlich.
I don't know if it's so completely different, but the approach is of course more holistic. In every moment of our existence, we have to try to call our attention to verify, to check that we are in the here and in the now. When you say relaxation techniques, you might assume I'm trying to complete a certain number or a sequence of exercises, and then it's all taken care of and you don't have to think about it. This is not how Alexandertechnique works. In Alexandertechnique, you aim to stay constantly focused, and this trains the body, the mind, and mental presence in such a way that you're more present and more alert. This can simply be converted into energy or power.
Aspekt, der mir sehr gut gefällt, ist, dass du von der Präsenz im Jetzt sprichst.
One aspect that I like very much is that you are talking about the presence in the now. And I see it again and again in Alexandertechnique and in musicians. It is always about being in the now and reacting to the context in which you are at the moment. If I have a forte in a big band, for example, it requires a different kind of breathing than when I have a delicate phrase in the orchestra. Seen this way, what has to be done would be to allow the body to complete these tasks For example, letting the body get the air it needs for an upcoming task. It is a different approach to let things happen rather than using a strict breathing technique in the manner of I will breathe exactly the same way every time. And what plays a role, what I always notice is that you have to let go of security. You let go and trust that the body will do what it is supposed to do. And I must admit, I have had great problems there. I wanted to control, and now I can say that I had the illusion that control or controlling gives me security. I now feel the complete opposite. Letting go creates a feeling of uncertainty, but actually brings better results. What do you think about that?
Ganz genauso. Ich meine, du sprichst einen ganz wichtigen.
Exactly like that. I mean, you're talking about a very important point, namely this desire and the need to feel control. We all know this. As a trumpet player, we need security. We need the certainty or the assurance that we will hit the note, especially when playing high. And then we, of course, look for our control in the tension of the body. I was originally brought up with a traditional method. I just call it the belly crunch, that one used as breath support, and I have had this kind of lessons for a long time, and I have to say with some success. When I came to America, that was in 1982, I learned the principle wind and song. This goes back to Arnold Jacobs. Arnold Jacobs was a former tubist with the Chicago Symphony, and basically the head of the so-called Chicago Brass School. I then spent 2 years studying very intensively with Vincent Chikowitz, who was one of the leading and best pedagogies of his time and perhaps even to this day deserves this title. I also had lessons with Arnold Jacobs and Bud Herseth and was able to get to know it really well. For me back then, it was, as you have described it, almost a kind of culture shock to suddenly experience that this controlling, this holding, this physical fixation is exactly what we don't need. What steals our freedom, what deprives us of energy, what does not allow us to breathe freely and deeply, namely to collect the energy that is needed to be able to get our lips vibrating. We need air volume and air velocity in order to really generate sounds and get our lips vibrating. And for this, we need the exact opposite, a relaxed body. Relaxed, however, with a certain tension that can also generate this energy. So everything that we do is still very active. It is never the passivity that relaxes us, but always a free activity. It is a long learning process to be able to understand and experience this process.
Ja, das sehe ich genauso. Der Begriff Lockerheit wird immer mit so einer gewissen Schlaffheit.
The term relax is always associated with certain floppiness or passivity. But it is actually just the opposite. Being relaxed means to me that I use the energy where it is needed and I do not have additional tensions, which might even inhibit the energy I need.
Und das wiederum ist natürlich ein Prozess, der auch
This is a process that depends on how we direct our thoughts. A simple example, when we speak, we do not have to think about how our tongue forms the L, or how our lips move to say P, or what happens in our throat with K. How do we form vowels and syllables? Our thoughts will revolve around what we want to say or how we want to say it. This applies also to playing the trumpet. It is very important that our physique functions correctly. However, if we try to control every single detail, we will face great difficulties. There's this famous sentence, paralysis by analysis.
Ja, den kenne ich auch.
This means if we try to control our physical functions and our muscular activities, if we try to control each individual muscle, we get into a kind of paralysis. We can no longer allow the natural coordination of our body to happen. This often causes great problems for us when we are playing, because the need for control makes us want to control details, individual functions. We think about every muscle in our embouchure, and we try to control every muscle of our respiratory activity. This does not work. Our brain is an excellent computer. It controls probably the most complicated machine ever, the human body. We think consciously about a result we would like to achieve, but the process that produces these results takes place at an unconscious level. This means that a large portion of our brain is not merely responsible for our conscious decisions, but for things that happen within us rather automatically. It's like driving a car. When I drive, I only need to know how to turn the wheel, how to step on the gas, how to brake, and how to change gears. I don't need to understand the complicated electronic and technical processes of the engine. If I wanted to keep track of all that, I would not be able to pay attention to the traffic and I would cause an accident. The same applies to instrumental technique and focusing your mind when you're playing the trumpet.
Ja, das heißt also,
Ideally, you should only think about the music and let the body do its thing, or rather let the unconscious mind lead.
den Körper machen.
And perhaps on a higher level, you should just have a few basic guidelines leading your actions.
Faktoren hat. Und du hast es eben schon dieses Song and Wind.
You have already mentioned the song and wind principle. They could be the guidelines. The song would be being in the music or having a musical idea present or creating it in the moment. And wind, the air, would be the means to its implementation. Is that correct?
Sehe ich das so richtig?
Richtig, ja. Also dieses Prinzip.
Yes, quite right. Song and Wind describes beautifully but simply how we can learn to master a very complex system. It sounds very simple, but in reality it's not an easy process, in the sense that we need focused attention and a lot of training in order to manage everything. Vincent Chickowitz said, "It is simple, but it is not easy." The principle is actually very simple, but it's not always easy to implement. Song means, as you pointed out, that we have to sing in our mind, that we have to develop a musical idea in order to produce the physical process of wind. Air volume and air velocity that cause our lips to vibrate and thereby produce sounds are transformed into music. The guidelines are always there when we observe ourselves during playing and practicing.
Das heißt, du hast diese beiden.
This means there are two general guidelines, but you will distance yourself from them occasionally. There can be problems with tonguing or high notes or something like that. There are many different technical problems, but you always have a superior concept, a roof, and then you occasionally visit different rooms with students and observe the issues in the context of song and wind. So no functions are isolated, they are always seen as part of the overall context.
The overall context is always present, but of course we have to train slowly and continuously and develop our skills. So to return to the simple example of driving a car, a beginner who does not immediately master the smooth coordination between gas and clutch must first learn to develop his coordination through some experience and training. This is how he'll be able to carry out everything automatically. This also applies to us musicians. We always start with very simple things in order to achieve what we want. A free body, free breathing, a free flow of air, a sound that is round, full, and without any unwanted noise. We should use very simple exercises to stabilize these skills. Then we can continue and add more complex things when simple things become more automated. This is the practicing process in which we immerse ourselves daily.
Es gibt von Charlie Parker, glaube ich, den schönen Spruch.
Charlie Parker once said, "Master the instrument, master the music, and then forget all that shit and play."
Exactly.
I think that kind of says it all. The focus is probably often too much on master the instrument. Forget all that shit is maybe mentioned only in passing. Be spontaneous, as they say. And you said earlier, it is not easy to let go when it concerns a subject of intensive involvement.
Absolut, sehr intensiv.
Absolutely. It is intensive. I remember my first lesson with Arnold Jacobs. He had a range of equipment for breathing exercises in his studio, devices for measuring lung volumes, pressure ratios, etc. It was quite an interesting display. He used the equipment to observe and find out his students' needs.
So he was very systematical, like a scientist doing his research.
Certainly, very systematical, like a scientist. He had also done some in-depth research at the Medical Institute of the University of Chicago, where he carried out measuring tests with his colleagues Chickowitz, Herseth, Farkas, Crisafulli, and Dale Clevenger. He took pictures of different forms of the embouchure and of vibrating lips. He researched breathing volume and interthorax pressure already in the 1950s. This became the norm later on, but he was one of the first to do it, and he did very thorough research. He based his system on his research. He had a huge analytical knowledge. He knew every muscle and nerve of the body and could explain everything. He was able to transform his vast knowledge into instructions and simple exercises for the students. They didn't have to learn the complex details, but his advices helped the students to make physical adjustments that made them play better. One time I had done many breathing exercises, and he had led me through the equipment. And then came the sentence you quoted by Charlie Parker, "Forget about this." Now imagine yourself sitting in orchestra hall and listening to Bud Herseth performing pictures at an exhibition. Do you know how he sounds? Can you really hear him? Can you imagine how it sounds? How does it feel? And now, play. The conditioning with breathing exercises and using the equipment resulted in some changes in the physical processes for sure, and the idea of letting the music take over then triggered the freedom to just let it happen, according to the principles of Alexandertechnique.
Was mir auch immer wieder auffällt, ist, dass einfache Antworten oder scheinbar einfache Antworten.
What I always notice is this. Seemingly simple answers actually always require complex thinking processes and also very thorough knowledge, just like you described it with the equipment and anatomical knowledge. I also apply the song and wind principle with my students. Right at the beginning, I tell the small children they just need to do a couple of things. Let's sing this, that's how it should sound, and then you blow air. And then we practice together. I have systemized this for myself. I write reminders for the students in the sheet. And it eventually occurred to me that there is a very handy natural reminder, that is the breath mark. It is always there. I do it quite systematically with my students. In the beginning, the breath mark is a reminder to simply blow air. And then there are a few other things, finding a balance according to Alexandertechnique and so on. Gradually I attach more and more content to the breath mark. Are you doing it the same?
Not as systematically as you. Of course, I am dealing with university students who are more advanced and also need a more intensive approach in studying than children. It all depends on the student. You'll notice what he needs. Does he need a lot of reminders, pictures, explanations? Does he only need positive experiences without too much explaining? These are all different processes, which of course depend on the student. In this respect, there are many things I do. Of course, there's always a pencil on the music stand. Whether one is practicing, whether one is teaching, or sitting at a rehearsal, a pencil is a necessity. You should never forget it. Sometimes I write down certain points or plans as to what should happen during practice and give it to the student. Of course, certain notes are made, but as I said, not very systematically, but according to the situation.
How could someone approach this who does not have a teacher at all, or does not have a teacher who works in this way? How can they access this? How could he work independently with song and wind?
Ja, ich denke schon, dass es
In the long run, I think it is necessary to work with a teacher. There are many things that one does not recognize immediately when trying to observe oneself. You need some experience to perceive sounds, or your own sound. Your sound will tell you what you're doing wrong or what you're doing well, and this is not always immediately recognizable for a beginner. It takes a trained ear. You also need a teacher's experience to know which exercise is suitable at which moment. It is not only the exercise per se, but the way you play it and what it is intended for. In this respect, I would say that an autodidactic approach has its limits, but this also depends very much on the individual. I will not say that it is not possible, but you should not rely on it alone. There are, of course, many helpful tools to work with or help, e.g., in practicing proper inhaling. For example, you can place a short hose in your mouth and then breathe deeply in and out. This really helps to practice a free, deep inhalation. The hose is like an extension of the trachea and opens the air passages so that air can flow freely and deeply without resistance and without constrictions. The hose facilitates breathing and makes it more even. It is a very easy tool to practice with. You can also use equipment like the Breath Builder, which is already a household name and rather inexpensive purchase. It is a very, very good piece of equipment. I think any equipment should always be simple and easily available, or you won't do the exercises.
Ja.
And exercises have to be done, and they have to be done regularly to get the most out of them. These are simple exercises for achieving a good inhalation technique, like yawning. Yawning is an innate reflex. It opens up everything. The larynx stays low and the tongue stays low. Yawning allows us to inhale freely. When we take a deep breath, we can think about sucking. We could pretend to be sucking something, a long spaghetti noodle, and let the air to flow into our body. These are very simple ideas for creating a healthy body awareness.
In my teaching, I use singing and pressing valves simultaneously, or blowing air and pressing valves. Can you give some pointers? What should you pay attention to?
Ja.
Well, it is such a great method. I'm not quite sure who invented it. It's not so important, but Vincent Chickowitz, for one, developed this kind of pre-exercises and used them all the time. He probably more or less invented it and developed a method out of it. We can easily experience what air in motion means with wind patterns and air exercises. Air in motion means we have no blockages, nothing that holds the air in the body, but we give it away. We see and feel the air. There is the famous exercise with a sheet of paper. Hold a sheet of paper in front of you and blow at it. We can see the amount of energy that air has. With these wind patterns, we try to make music in the truest sense of the word. For example, we could practice the beginning of the Haydn concert only by using air patterns and pressing valves. We would be breathing more often than when playing the trumpet because the air consumption would be much higher, but we would be learning how to set the air in motion and, foremost, how to connect it with the music. When practicing with air patterns, it is important not to practice mechanically, but perform the air patterns with a musical idea. We should be thinking about sound, melody, musical expression, articulation, and rhythmic accuracy at the same time. We would truly be experiencing the music with the airflow. This programming of the body will allow the whole process to occur automatically. We should let the music lead us and forget mechanical aspects like how can I get the air moving.
Das finde ich auch immer sehr wichtig, dass
Never forget that the meaning of technique exercises or technique in general is to make music. Technique should never be isolated, it should always be connected to music.
Auch ein Satz, den
Chickowitz always said, first things first. We are musicians. We are not trumpet players or machines that produce sounds. We are musicians. Bearing the motto, we are musicians in mind, we can learn to work.
Genau mit diesem Aspekt, wir sind Musiker, müssen wir lernen zu arbeiten.
That was very well said. I would like to thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you.